This segment brought to you by Bravo Company USA. This episode is produced by CCW Safe and FTA. Hey, Larry Vickers here. Welcome to the Larry Vickers podcast presented by Firearms Trainers Association. This episode, HK416. Special request from a friend of mine. I know a little bit about this gun. It was involved with the development of it from the start, not only from the end user side, but also HK side. So I'll kind of take you through where this gun came about and the who, what, when, and where, why of the 416. It started way back in the day, would have been pre-9/11. I was visiting HK Germany. Actually, I was the small arms development representative from Delta when I was over there, and we were talking various projects, including looking at potentially having HK work on a 1911, doing a 1911 project, which ended up not going anywhere. Really never even made it past paper. But one thing I noticed, Ernst Malk was a great dude. He's the CEO of HK at the time. On his wall, he had an M4 carbine schematic blueprint. And I was talking in his office and I said, Ernst, what's the story on the M4 up there? He goes, we were looking at possibly adapting the G36 gas system to the M4 carbine to address some of the issues that the U.S. military has had. And Ernst was the guy who spearheaded the effort by H&K to improve the British SA-80, which they're going to be doing that again with the SA-80A3, I believe it's called. So HK had done that. It was very successful and had taken that gun and really kind of turned it around. And his theory was, hey, U.S. military, U.S. SOCOM's having issues with the M4. We think we can help. Well, where that had come from was the famous Crane report. And a lot of this stuff, guys, if you dig around online, AR15.com, and different places, you'll find a lot of information on this. Also, Black Rifle 1 and 2, I highly recommend reading. Get the Vickers Guide books on the AR-15. The AR-15 Volume 1 sold out. We're in the process of redoing it. We're going to relaunch it in the spring of 2020. And then AR-15 Volume 2. And there's a lot of information in there on this, in those various books and online. But essentially, the SOCOM community, specifically the Navy SEALs, but others, they were using the M4 carbine out of its intended design envelope. It was designed to be basically a carbine that was issued to support troops, to tankers, to truck drivers, to others. The theory behind that gun is, hey, this is a gun that we're going to issue to people that if they really need a serious gun, they're going to be using some form of full-size M16. Well, because of its compact size and whatnot and retractable buttstock, the M4, the CAR-15, kind of gravitated down the path of replacing the MP5 within SOCOM. So the MP5, the HK MP5, was widely used, had been for many years, but it wasn't long before we realized, hey, this is a great gun, but it's basically a large pistol. It's a select fire pistol, more or less effective out to 50 meters. It's like shooting somebody with a big pistol. So we need to start looking at a gun that will replace this. And Delta had kind of been doing that with the CAR-15. Delta had done it with the Colt Model 723 CAR-15 when I first got in there. Great gun, fantastic rifle. And the theory was, well, this is the direction we're going. In Delta's perspective, they were like, can we make it smaller? Can we make it a gun that is not a 14.5-inch barrel? Can we make it a gun that's easier to maneuver in close quarters? SOCOM's point of view was well, hey, we've got this M4 carbine, and it's great, but it's not really holding up the way we want it to, because you got Navy SEALs, you got different Rangers, you got different people using the gun, and they're kind of pushing that gun outside of its performance envelope. So that was two different paths that were going on. Really wasn't happening in Delta. At Delta, we did very little full auto fire, but what we wanted was a gun that was more compact, a version of the M4 that was more compact. SOCOM, with the Crane report and whatnot, were having durability issues with the M4 because they were pushing it kind of in a direction for sustained automatic fire. They were really kind of pushing the design envelope of the gun. So that's where that was coming from. HK on their own saw the M4 problem from the SOCOM side and said, well, maybe we can tackle the problem, adapt the G36 gas system to the M4 and kind of answer the mail for everybody. Well, I went to HK in Germany, saw the schematic on the wall, got to talking to Ernst a little bit about what's your thought process there, and he's like, well, this is my thought process, yada, 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 and I went, I knew in Delta that we wanted a more compact version of the M4 carbine for close quarters battle. We'd tried it. We had tried different smaller variants of the Car 15 of the M4 that had been on the market, but remember, the issue there is a direct impingement gas system. On a standard M4 or standard M16 or whatnot, the gas is tapped off at the gas port and it follows a stainless steel tube back to the bolt carrier, and then it cycles the action. To really get one of those guns to run right, you need some barrel length past the gas port before the end of the muzzle. So you have the ability for that gas to siphon off, go back, cycle the action before the projectile exits the muzzle. That was always tricky and always problematic, and still is to this day with short barreled M4 carbines or Car 15 style weapons that use that direct impingement gas system. It's always been an issue. Delta, we tried as many as we could get our hands on, and they just didn't work. They just didn't work. They might work with a certain set of circumstances, but if we changed ammo or temperature fluctuations, now it's cold out, or now we suppress it, or whatever the case may be, they just did not work. They were not reliable to the degree that we needed in the Delta Force. So the theory is, okay, these short-barreled direct impingement Car 15 M4 style guns aren't going to work for us. Let's look and see what else is out there. And the two guns that the unit looked at was the compact version of the G36 and the SIG 552. Both guns work pretty well. The problem is, once you get used to the ergonomics of the M4, the Car 15, it's really hard to go with anything else. The magazine release location, the bolt release, the selector, the compact nature of the receiver, it's just difficult to go in a different direction. G36 overall is a good, reliable gun, but it is never measured up to the M16 M4 family in terms of ergonomics or easy use. SIG 552, kind of on the heavy side. At that time, remember, they didn't offer an aluminum lower on that, but even when they did offer an aluminum lower, SIG or Swiss Arms at that time, the gun was just kind of heavy and bulky, and ergonomically it was a different style gun than the M4, the M16, so guys had a hard time with that. So really the unit was, they just didn't have a good solution. So when I saw the schematic on the wall at Ernst Mauch's office, I went, maybe we can talk to HK about doing a more compact version of the M4, but with the G36 style gas system. So I got to talking to him. I said, what would you need from an end user side to get this going? He goes, well, we'd need a partner. We would need somebody just like with the Brits. We worked with them. We would develop things, we would tweak things, we would modify it. They would give us feedback on how well it worked, and then we were a partnership. And that's why that ended up being a successful partnership. And he said, we would need a partner. We would need some guns to modify. But we would need essentially, we could modify a certain amount of guns, hand them over to our partner. They work on it, they develop them, they shoot them, they give us feedback on what's working and what's not. And then through that process, we can get the gun where it needs to be. So I went back home, Delta, and had a meeting of the minds there, all the powers that be. And I said, look, this is what HK is offering. No cost to the unit, no other than some loaner guns. They just want some guns to work on, to modify, but they'll do it on their own dime. They don't, other than loaner guns to work on, they don't require anything from us. They just want to get some feedback, and there's no obligation to buy the gun when they're done. If we don't like where it went, we don't have to buy it. So the powers that be kicked it around, and to their credit, they said, you know what, there's no downside to this, why not do it? So we did. We gave HK X number of guns, and they got started. Well, SOCOM got wind of it, and they put a big stop on it. And I thought, oh, we're dead in the water. We're toast here. Hey, or we're showing favoritism to a certain vendor, yada, yada, yada. Well, they did a legal review and said, nope, you're good to go. You can continue, which surprised me. And what it really boiled down to was we weren't giving HK anything more than some guns to work on, which were government property. And we weren't giving them a tech data package. We weren't giving them blueprints. We weren't doing anything that was going to violate any kind of proprietary information or copyrights or patents or any kind of that stuff. We just gave them government guns that the government had bought. A government entity loaned them some guns to work on, and that was all we did. So things proceeded. And there was a back and forth for a little bit. HK modified some guns, sent them over. The guns ran great from the start, I can tell you. Right off the bat, they ran fantastic. There was some things that need to be tweaked, and I'll take you through some of that stuff when I get inside the 416 here. Kind of the last hurdle was we got to figure out a rail system that we can take on and off the gun to maintain the gas system, but it's got to be able to retain zero. And I remember that was a real head scratcher at the time. It was like, how are we going to crack this code? How are we going to have this rail that we can take on and off and that will retain zero? So if we have a laser mounted and we take it off to maintain the gas system, to clean it or whatever the case may be, and we put it back on, how are we going to be able to make sure that it's going to retain zero? And to me, I just didn't know they were going to be able to pull it off. That was my bad, because you got to remember, these are the people that made the caseless gun with the G11. They came up with a system that now has been widely copied. People like Geisley and other people here in the United States have copied HK's approach. It's a pretty ingenious system, and I'll show you what it's all about. Once that hurdle was crossed, then the unit went ahead and placed an order for X number 100 416s, and as far as I know, they're still using the gun to this day. The gun has held up very well for them. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's going to be some tweaks along the way, but overall, a big success for the unit, and also even a much bigger success for HK, because the gun has went on to be very successful around the world. Not only used in various places in SOCOM, obviously the Navy SEALs used it on the Bin Laden mission, which was kind of the crowning jewel of the 416. But you've got a wide variety of countries. France just adopted it. A wide variety of people are using it. German Special Operations are using it. So the 416 has been very successful for HK. They've tweaked it along the way. I've got a more updated version that I'm going to show you and kind of point out some changes they've done. So without any further ado, we'll take a break here. We'll look at getting this thing busted down, and I'll talk you through some pointers and some differences and some hurdles that HK had to overcome with this gun. Stay tuned. All right, gang, let's bust this thing down. Get my rack out of here. Put it underneath so it doesn't bother Justin's OCD. All right, so mag out. Make sure the gun's cleared. This is one of the earlier steel HK mags. You can see the LE markings. It was made actually during the Clinton assault weapons ban. This was an HK G41 mag. G41 was the version, more or less the version of the HK.33 that HK did with some M16 style features. It used an M16 style mag, bolt hold open device, forward assist, yada, yada, yada. The gun never really went anywhere, where they took their G41 mag, dusted it off, and updated it, and it became the British SA-80 mag. I don't know that they still make this mag anymore. It wasn't a bad mag, but it had a few fleas to it. They have since moved on to some polymer mags, and I'll show you some of the stuff that HK's doing now. But we'll get back to this mag here in a minute, because there's something I need to talk to you about it when we get back to it. So make sure the gun's cleared, of course. Now, disassembles like a standard M4, M16. Push pin in the back. Charging handle comes out. Bolt carrier. I'm going to show you. I'll go ahead and bust the upper down completely here. Couple things. You see the dot here on the buffer. That was one thing that I recommended to HK that they do. Let me get my trusty pen out, and I'll also show you the spring. This one is so early, it does not have the red paint on it. Oh, what a shocker. I told him, I said, hey, you guys need to do something to differentiate the buffer and the buffer spring, because my thought process was, this is going to be a good, you're going to sell a lot of these uppers, and they're going to be put on a lot of semi-auto Colt and just full auto Colt lowers. That hasn't really largely been the case for a variety of reasons. The upper's never really seen the widespread use that I anticipated. HK was never real wild on that idea, to be honest with you, because you got to remember something. They're used to building all these guns, and they control all the specs. They control all the tolerances and everything. And the thought process that they would build this upper, and then they would send it out, and somebody's going to go buy an AR of whatever brand at Cabela's or somewhere and stick it on there. They were never kosher with that idea. So they never really warmed up to it. Got to remember also, German gun company, not really a company here in the United States. In the United States, we understand that people do that all the time. It's just kind of the way it is. My theory was, hey, you need to make sure your buffer and your buffer spring are identifiable. People can identify them at a glance. So that's where they put the HK logo on the buffer, and then they put that little red dot. And then the buffer, this gun's so new, it's serial number 88, which is the product code for HK for the 416-005141. It's the 5,141st 416 ever made. So this is an early gun. They've no doubt made tens of thousands by now. They may have even made over 100,000 of these things by now, but this was one under serial number 10,000. So it doesn't have that red paint on the recoil spring or the buffer spring like it should. If you buy a kit now or you see one now, generally it'll have that red paint, so you can tell at a glance it's 416 specific. What does that mean? A heavier spring. It's a heavier spring. If memory serves me correct, I heard they increased the spring tension by about 20%. And the buffer, I believe, it's a little bit different buffer setup. HK doesn't have the washers inside. They have what, tungsten powder. They put it in like the UMP and whatnot. It's tungsten powder inside. Unless they've changed the design, it has a canister inside with tungsten powder, which acts kind of as a dead blow hammer. My gut is it's more or less the equivalent to about an H3 buffer. So you had essentially a buffer spring that's 20% heavier, 20% stiffer, 20% stronger, and then a buffer here that's roughly the equivalent to an H3. So you needed to be able to identify that and know that right from Jump Street. Now, this is an earlier 416, as you know. It uses standard lower components for a fully automatic M16 or M4. The newer ones, they've modified. All right, you can spot the standard style safety. It's non-ambi, right? The other thing is, this one, unlike the newer ones, when the hammer's down, you can't put it on safe. The newer 416s, the newer semi-automatic versions of the 416, the MR223 and whatnot, you can put them on safe with the hammer down. The HK's changed that design. As far as I know, it's the only gun out there in the AR format that you can put on safe with the hammer down. I believe that's a German Army requirement. That's something that the Germans require, is the gun can go on safe regardless of the hammer position. I'm personally a fan of that. You can still cycle the gun, load or unload the gun or whatever, but I'm a fan of you put it on safe, and that way, you got to remember, this is going to be issued to somebody who's never handled guns before, that is not gun savvy at all, and you got to assume they're going to be doing the worst. They're going to have the gun pointed where it shouldn't be pointed, and they're going to have their finger on the trigger when they shouldn't have their finger on the trigger. So having the gun on safe and be able to unload in the gun with the hammer in any position is a plus. All right. Now, other than that, fairly standard lower in the respect. Earlier ones used Tango down pistol grip. HK went away from that and developed their own pistol grip. This one uses a commercial style buffer tube, and this is a mag pull buttstock that I swapped out. This particular gun had that early M4 style buttstock, which had the HK logo on one side, but I swapped it out with a mag pull a mag pull buttstock. If you notice the magazine well, one of the things that I urged HK to do was to maximize the mag well bevel, which they did, and they did a great job, to their credit. All the different AR companies that have been affiliated with over the years, HK, then Daniel Defense, and then BCM, I've urged them to maximize, on the forging, maximize the bevel for the magazine well. That was something Colt's never done, even to this day. And unfortunately, sad to say, that when HK went away from this magazine well with their unique angle, they went back to a more standard bevel on the newer HK416 A5 and the newer MR223 A3. So, and you'll see that when I get to the gun later, which is kind of a sad thing. Now you'll notice everybody gets their panties in a bunch about how this lower is longer and has a different angle than a standard M16 or M4 lower. And like I mentioned, that's been addressed with the newer versions of the 416. Now, I'll tell you why that is. if you see this little notch right here, HK makes, and I'm assuming they still offer it, they made a blank fire version of the metal magazine. And what it had here up front, it had a little metal plunger, a blocker, and when the magazine was inserted, it depressed on a tab here, and this little metal tab in front that was spring-loaded prevented you from putting live rounds in the gun, or live rounds in the magazine. That was the theory behind it. It would not allow you didn't have the capacity or the room inside the magazine to put live rounds. You could only put blank rounds. And HK designed it. To their credit, they thought through the whole thing. You could actually force some live rounds in it when it's in, but the blank adapter they came up with was a bullet trap blank adapter. So even if you had 2 or 3 live rounds in here, the blank adapter would capture those live rounds. Very well thought out, very well engineered. Downside to it, obviously, is expensive. And here's the other issue, is this blank adapter, in order to be a bullet trap blank adapter, is very heavy. All right, it was very heavy. So the end of your gun, now you got this heavy device that you've bought, and on the end of the gun, you've got this thing that weighs a lot, and it's pulling the gun down. So that their blank fire safety setup was a great idea. It just never really went anywhere. But they wanted to make sure that this magazine and that magazine, that blank fire adapter, which was adaptable to the British SA-80 magazine well, was adaptable to the early 416. Hence why it's longer, and you see this notch right here. They've went away from that. My guess is they realized, hey, that's not really selling. We might as well abandon it. And the thing that people get all their panties in a bunch about these early guns is the early PMags were not adaptable to these. And remember, this gun predated the PMag. But the 416 wasn't in widespread use. The early PMag was adapted or developed to basically use a standard M4, M16 lower, so the early PMags couldn't be used. Now, as time went on, Magpul completely fixed that. The later generation PMags will go in and out of a 416 with no problem. The early ones would not. So, long story short, this feature basically went away. But that's why this magwell is at this angle and it has this notch, is so it will interface with the blank fire version of this steel magazine. All right? Now, moving on. Standard charging handle. This is a Blue Force, a Bravo Company one. One of the early gunfighter ones, but HK uses a standard style charging handle. Theirs is Ambi. You'll see it later on a different gun, but it fully interchanges with a standard M16 or AR-15 style charging handle. The real difference gets into when we get into the bolt carrier here. All right, let's go ahead and bust this thing down. Push out the cotter pin. Cotter pin is standard, as you see on a standard M16 M4. This has a firing pin safety on it, and I'll tell you why that is. When HK developed this gun and they increased the buffer weight and specifically increased the recoil spring weight, they opened up the Pandora's box of slam fires. Early M16s had an issue with slam fires due to the mass of and the weight of the firing pin. Because remember, a standard M16 M4 has a floating firing pin. That's why when you charge the gun and pull it out, you'll see a little indentation on the primer. Is that when you were in the process of doing that, that firing pin actually tapped the primer slightly. Early M16s, or AR-15s back in the day, the firing pin mass was such with certain primers you could slam fire the gun. Well, HK opened that Pandora's box because now still had a floating firing pin, but they've increased the buffer, but specifically the recoil spring weight. And now, depending on the primers, you could have slam fires. I've seen it. My buddy Ken Hackathorn had one when we were shooting some frangible and he loaded around and slam fired. HK needed to do something on that. So they did a couple things. One, they did a firing pin spring, and they also did this firing pin safety, which is this plunger right here. What this means is it's activated by the top of the hammer. If you see this mark right here, you see that shiny mark right there, it interfaces with this firing pin safety. All right, so when the hammer comes up, it hits the firing pin safety, moves it out of the way, and then the hammer can hit the firing pin and fire the gun. All right, that largely fixed the problem. The issue was This is a non-standard dimension on an M16 or M4 and AR-15. Nobody ever got their panties in a bunch about the height and the profile of the hammer. Now, height's critical and the profile's critical based on interacting with the firing pin safety. So, once again, they kind of opened another can of worms. As time has went on, and the reality of people taking 416 uppers and putting on different lowers has kind of passed. That hasn't been a big deal. But back in the day, it was like I said, they answered one problem, but opened up another problem. All right, now, in order to completely disassemble this, I took out the cotter pin, same as a standard M16 M4. I want to go ahead and pull the firing pin safety, and now your firing pin and firing pin spring will come out. They separate. There's your cotter pin, or your cam pin, excuse me, not cam pin. And then now I can go ahead and take the bolt out. You notice the bolt is not scalloped and doesn't have gas rings because it doesn't need it. That scallop portion and the gas rings, it is basically seals off the gas chamber for the bolt carrier on the standard M16 or M4. This gun doesn't need it. My personal opinion is HK probably could have answered the mail with just a firing pin spring, maybe one a little stiffer than this because this is about like a ballpoint pin spring. They probably could have answered the mail with just a firing pin spring and not had to go down the path of the firing pin safety at all. If you see the one they use on the UMP, their firing pin safety is on the side of the bolt carrier. It's not on top. So the side of the hammer activates it and pushes it out of the way. That might have been a better way to go than the top, but it is what it is. They've been doing this on the 416, the 417, and the semi-automatic versions of those guns for a long time now. Now, your piston strikes here, all right? And then the other thing you got here is these anti-tilt pads. And at the time I thought, oh man, HK ought to patent this and whatnot. That's a great idea. And everybody started ripping them off and whatnot. Well, I found out they couldn't patent it. There was prior art. The Taiwanese T65 piston gun from yesteryear has the anti-tilt pads. And then we go, why do they need it? Well, it's real simple. M16 M4, gas goes in, the gas carrier key goes down inside the bolt carrier and then expands. So it expands in the same line or the same linear fashion as the barrel or the projectile. So when it expands, it's pushing the bolt carrier straight back. Now, you take a 416 or a piston gun like this, you don't have gas going down inside the bolt carrier, expanding and pushing the bolt carrier straight back, and essentially the bolt / piston straight forward. What you have is the piston is hitting here, or the piston extension, the pusher rod is hitting here, and now it's automatically wanting to do this to push the bolt carrier back. So that's why they needed to come up with these anti-tilt pads to keep it from tilting and allow it to track straight back in through the buffer tube. HK put a lot of time and effort into this. They did a great job with it. Some of your aftermarket piston conversions for ARs didn't do that. I mean, some of the ones on the US market didn't do it, and you would actually see the bolt carrier gouge the lower receiver as it was going into the buffer tube. They didn't put the time or the effort or the ammunition downrange to perfect their design. HK did. So that's why you see this, and this is universally copied now on all piston guns. When you see an AR with, they basically do exactly what HK's done. This is all one piece, part of the bolt carrier, and then they have the anti-tilt pads. All right, so that's the story behind that. HK wanted to do the enhanced G36 style extractor, which is actually a much better extractor design than the one on the M16 or the M4. They figured out they couldn't. They used the same materials, which is excellent materials, metallurgy and heat treat and whatnot, but they had to use essentially the same style design as the M16 M4 because they just didn't have the area, they didn't have the geometry, they didn't have the room in order to adapt the G36 style extractor to this. So hence why you see this still uses a standard M16 style extractor, albeit designed and made by HK with their engineering expertise, but it doesn't have a G36 style. All right, gang, that's the lower. All right, then that's the bolt carrier. Now let's talk about the upper. HK early on developed it to where you could take the locking lugs on the bolt and use that as a tool to loosen the cross bolt. They've since gotten away from that. I think they realized the average Joe using their bolt to do that probably isn't such a great idea. Special operations is one thing, but the average guy doing it's probably not a great thing. So they've kind of moved away from that approach. But that loosens it. Unscrew it, and then you pull it out. Now this comes out the front. All right. If you notice, this is one of the later 416 barrel profiles. The standard earlier 416 barrel profile was straight back, very heavy barrel. And I can tell you where I think that came from. We didn't really need it in Delta, but they also knew, hey, we're going to be selling this gun to a wide variety of people. Particularly, we might be selling it to SOCOM, which has the same special operations guys that were running the M4 outside of its design envelope. So we need to overbuild this gun so in case they take this gun out and hammer it full auto, the gun will hold up. Well, that's neither here nor there. They had a good point. The problem is once Delta gets this thing and they put lights and lasers and stuff on it, it makes the gun heavy, real heavy. So they started looking at ways to lighten the weight. They went a different direction on the rail system. They also lightened the barrel profile, and this has one of the lighter weight barrel profiles right here. Now here's your pusher rod and here's your piston. To take out the pusher rod, real simple, it's all a self-contained unit. You just pull it back like this and tilt it off to the side. And this is all self-contained from the factory. You can see they pinch it right here and it keeps it all together. HK did a lot of work and a lot of effort onto this to figure out the coil spring setup, so where they had the spring tension they needed to allow the gun to function properly, but if it gets dirt or debris or sand in here, it's not going to shut the gun down. I mean, that's generally not an issue with this weapon at all. Once you've done that now, you can pull the gas piston out the rear. And there it is. This has gas rings. They last a long time. The way you can tell if they're still intact is real simple. Put it in the gas block. If it stays in place, you're good to go. If you put it in there and you tilt it up and it falls out, that means your gas pistons are toast and you need new gas pistons or a new piston. I haven't seen that, but I would imagine over time that could happen. Gas system's really very simple. HK patented it. It's an adaptation of the gas system used on the German G43, which was adapted from the Tokarev SVT40, and then later essentially used on the AR-18, AR-180 family. But very ingenious design. I'll put it in place here. What happens is gas comes in the gas block and then pushes the piston to the rear. Once it gets to a certain point, it opens up a gas vent on the front, and then the excess gas is vented through the front. So it only moves essentially about that far, and then the excess gas is vented out the front. That's enough inertia to cycle the action. Real slick. One thing you see is that this early one here does not have the vent. This is the gas block they put on what was a 10.4 inch barrel at the time. Later on, HK used a vented gas block on all. You can see it says 10 inch right there. That tells you it's a gas block for the shorter barreled 416. Later on, HK started using a vented gas block even for the 10 inch or the 11 inch barreled guns. The shorter barreled guns used the same gas block, which had a vent hole up front. This radius you see right here is for the folding front sight. So what you have here is there's your pivot pin location, and then there's a folding front sight you can bolt on here that folds down that allows you to take the rail system off, and then when you put it back on, you can fold it back up. But that's what this slope is for here, is the folding front sight. So you see this is the gas block for the shorter barreled on the earlier guns, and then later on the gas blocks became one and the same for all of them. And they also later on, they went into 11 inch barrel. The early ones were 10.4. HK realized just a little bit longer barrel length, let's bump it out to 11, is a good thing. So the reality of that is whatever you're using, you need to use the longest barrel length that you can use and still get the job done. So like if you're using a direct impingement gun, it's been proven that 12 inch barrel gun works a lot better than 11 or a shorter one. So every half inch or inch of barrel length really makes a big difference with these short barreled guns, even with a piston gun. It really makes a big difference. So if you can get an extra half inch or an inch and it doesn't impede your ability to use it for your mission, that's what you need to do. All right, now, you can see proprietary barrel nut. The other thing you're not going to be able to see here, because I'm not going to unscrew it, but the threads on the upper receiver are a centimeter longer. So instead of the ones on the M16 or the M4 coming out to about here, the one on the 416 comes out to about here. Much longer. That's great. It makes this, and it kind of makes you wonder why they didn't do that back in the day with the M16, M4. You know what I mean? It's too late now. There's too many guns out there. It wouldn't be reverse compatible. But HK realized, let's just extend that thread length to give ourselves more interface in order to bolt the barrel extension onto. Why not? And you know what? 100% right. These guns have a reputation for being very accurate. And I got to believe that's one of the reasons is the barrel lockup from when the barrel locks into the upper receiver is much more rigid because it's much longer. All right. Now here's your groove right here. That's where this cross bolt comes across and then screws into the other side. And there's like a clamping or a pinching effect between the two. And it clamps it down. Interesting. Up here you see a little tongue and groove. This fits into the upper receiver on the 416. That's what keeps that upper receiver, excuse me, the handguard from doing this number. It interfaces in, you clamp it, and now you have repeatability. I remember the Germans asked us, hey, is it a problem if we bump up the height of the receiver so we can interface the handguard system by a 1/4 inch or so? And you know, there's some guys at HK were making a big doubt. I go, what do you need to do that for? And they told me, yeah, go ahead, no problem. That ended it. No big deal. Whether this was a 1/4 inch lower or taller, it's not a big deal in the scheme of things. When you bring a gun up and you mount it and you're used to mounting a standard M4, you can kind of tell a little bit of a difference, but it's easily overcome. And then that gives them the ability for this tongue and groove effect to keep the side-to-side pivoting basically and eliminate it. That's why you see these rails are a little bit higher. It's also why you see the scallop back here on the 416. That's where that comes from, is that rail is a little bit higher. It clears the bushing here for the pusher rod, but more than that, it was to give them room to develop this tongue and groove setup for the rail system. All right, that's your upper. Now, a couple things. It may be very hard to see. It probably is going to be very, very difficult to see here, guys. But one thing that HK saw is with their cam pin is it would be pushed off to the side and would hit that inner track, and you can actually get premature wear there. And I've actually heard of some of them bulging out here on the side. Because remember, when the bolt carrier is cycling, this is what's keeping that bolt tracking straight. And then when it gets into position to turn, it turns and locks into the recess that's this bulged area. That's what this is all about. Well, HK had it to where it was coming out, and they have an area where this little cam pin was smacking into the side of the track in there, and you can even see a little burr on mine. You really won't be able to see it on this camera, but there's a little burr inside. That's where that comes from. They've addressed that issue. You see Colt, when they did their piston gun, they just put a little steel insert there to reinforce the upper receiver. It's one of those things that appears to be, it only wears so far and then it stops. It can be kind of alarming when you see a 416 early on, especially an older one, and you see it's hitting that area. You're like, what the hell is going on here? Well, what happens is it kind of wears to a certain point and it kind of stops. But that's something you can see with the earlier guns, which can be a little disconcerting. HK kind of cuts a little bevel there, and they've basically have addressed that problem. Other than that, standard barrel twist, 1 in 7, chrome line bore and chamber. A lot of the other stuff is straight up M4. In this case, standard style brass deflector, standard style forward assist, standard style dust cover. They now make it out of polymer. You know, they molded it out of polymer that you'll see later. You can adapt different accessories to it, like different sights and optics, like my Aimpoint Micro here, that adapt to Picatinny rails. So in that regard, it's as reverse compatible as it can be. But in terms of the internal operating mechanism, it's HK and it's 416 proprietary with not a lot of reverse compatibility. But the stuff you're bolting onto the gun and the magazine you're putting it in basically are reverse compatible to an M16 and M4. What I'm going to do next here, put this thing back together, and then we'll start rolling in a newer version of this platform and talk about some of the differences. Stay tuned. Hey, a little tip for you brought to you by my good friends at CCW Safe. Home Defense Carbine. How I set mine up, first and foremost, obviously you need good components. This is my BCM training gun, which I also use as a home defense carbine. In my opinion, the most important accessory to put on it is a red dot sight. I use and recommend aim point. To me, if you're going to bet your life on a red dot sight, it needs to be an aim point. So right off the bat, good red dot sight, aim point is my choice. Second to that, you could argue white light or sling. You can make an argument either way. What's next down the list? I use a Surefire X300. I've used it for years. They have a variety of them on the market now. Generally, Surefire is the go-to for this. There's other good lights out there, but as a general rule, when I grab a white light, it's a Surefire. Sling, my signature sling from Blue Force Gear. All right. Used it for a year. Many thousands are in service around the globe with law enforcement, military, and civilians. Fantastic company. Magazine I have in this, there's many mags on the market that work great. I've been using the Tango Down Arc 2 mag with great results. Scalar works, iron sights. This is a great home defense carbine setup. My personal training gun and home defense gun. BCM, aim point, Surefire, Blue Force Gear, Tango Down, Scalar works. Can't go wrong. Remember, this is very possibly a gun that may have to save your life and the lives of your loved ones. So if you cheap Charlie it, you're betting your life on something that may not get the job done when you need it to. Have a good one. LAV out. All right, hey, it's time to put this puppy back together. And then we're going to roll into comparing it to a newer version of the 416, specifically a semi-automatic variant. So let's get their upper receiver back together. One thing, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier or not, notice the sling loops, the Ambi sling loops. HK's largely went away from that. With the later ones, nobody's using them for a variety of reasons, but these are here, and you'll see a lot of the aftermarket rail systems that adapt to this. You actually have to cut these off in order to get the rail system on, but these have largely went away. So put their gas piston in first, comes in from the rear. All right, now we're going to put our pusher rod assembly in, and it starts back here first. And notice HK's got a steel bushing in place. They had to have that because they couldn't have this pusher rod pushing or cycling past aluminum. So they had to have this little bushing in place. So it goes back here, and then you compress it, put it in place, and there it is. All right, now rail system goes on. Goes back on, make sure this cross bolt's pulled all the way out and snug it all the way down. There you go. And just tighten it. I'll tighten it by hand, and then I'll tighten it with the bolt. You can also use a screwdriver if you so desire. It goes here. Come across and cinch it. There we go. Good deal. So the upper is pretty much good to go. We'll get to the charging handle here in a minute. I'm going to put the bolt carrier together now. Bolt goes in first. Same standard deal where, you know, the bolt can only go in one way to where the extractor's in the correct position. The one side's dimpled and it won't allow the cam pin to go in through one side. All right. Put this in position. Then we rotate it. Now, make sure you take your firing pin and firing pin spring. Now this skirt you see right here, this is what blocks, this is what is blocked by the firing pin safety. So you can, like my buddy Ken Hackathorn did, you can actually tune these firing pin safeties to where the hammer doesn't have to move as far to act, see the hammer hits the firing pin if you so desire. The other thing you can do, like Geisley and whatnot, they recommend, you know what, just take them out, just rely on the firing pin spring, and in that way it doesn't affect trigger pull or whatever the case may be. I've never really seen much of an issue with them. I'm pretty trigger insensitive, so as long as the gun has a decent, you know, consistent trigger, I'm happy. I'm not a guy who has to have the latest and greatest trigger in my gun, so I've left the firing pin safety completely stock. All right, so I'm going to turn this sideways. Get the firing pin spring on it. Go ahead and put it in. Now remember, you got to pull this out of the way in order to get that to go all the way down. Right? Now, and then the cotter pin, standard cotter pin in this case, and it goes in. As long as I hold my mouth a certain way. I need to tap on it a little bit. All right, puppy. sure I'm not interfering with the skirt. That's what it was, is I needed to depress the firing pin. That was the problem. I needed to depress the firing pin in order to get it past the skirt. So now it's ready to go. Now I take, charging handle goes in as normal, comes in the rear, and then your bolt carrier, one of the great things is that spring's going to push that bolt back out. So unlike a standard M16 M4 where if you have the bolt back, the bind on the gas rings will keep it back and you got to make sure you pull it out, the spring will push it out, which makes reassembly a bit easier. So you put this in, charging handle, and then your bolt carrier goes in, push it all the way into place. And it'll pull it, see the other thing, that spring works, it'll push it out a little way, so you need to be aware of that. You can help your cause a little bit by closing the ejection port cover, but it'll still push it out of battery. Now take the lower, I'm gonna make sure the hammer's cocked, just makes life easier. Pull your pins out to the side. The recoil spring, the buffer spring, and the buffer go in the exact same way as a standard M4. Push this in place, make sure you push your bolt carrier in place, and then you can push the pins in like that. Yeah, one thing I want to point out on the magazine, HK was the first that I know of that did the anti-tilt follower in the M16 M4 mag, because this follower was anti-tilt from the start. Been widely copied. Magpul is the most successful company that copied it and has been very successful with it with their polymer anti-tilt follower, but you can retrofit into standard M16 magazines. But HK was the first that I know of that did it. All right, so as far as the functions check goes, make sure the weapon's clear, of course. Put it on safe, attempt to fire, weapon doesn't fire. Put it on fire, pull the trigger, cycle the weapon, release the trigger. Should feel in here an audible click, pull the trigger. Weapon fires now, pocket again. Let's put it on full auto, pull the trigger. Now keep the trigger held to the rear, ease it forward. You should hear that was the auto safety tripping and releasing the hammer. Hammer fell. So there we go. Another thing I encouraged HK to do, I wasn't alone, and they probably would have done it on their own, was to do their classic pictograms for the lower, which I thought was a really cool touch. Overall, great weapon, little on the heavy side, very, very rugged, very, very reliable, and it's done very well around the globe for HK. A couple little side notes before we get to the latest and greatest versions. HK had an issue with the anodizing with the earlier guns. And you can even see some of the edges around here. If you look real close, all this gun's in great shape. I haven't used it a lot, but you'll see pictures of anodizing around the corners that are chipping off and whatnot, and you're like, what's that all about? And I remember talking to one of the HK engineers, and he goes, it's real simple. Germans don't build aluminum guns. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, think about it. Aluminum guns are largely a U.S. invention. And I went, you know what? He's right. Other than like the SIG 226, having an aluminum lower, they really didn't do much in the aluminum gun realm. So they had to learn the whole anodizing procedure. And that's why you saw the earlier guns. They would show anodizing wear and chips and stuff much sooner than you'd see with a Colt, because aluminum guns are a U.S. essentially invention. And they had to kind of learn through that. And that's obviously a fairly minor thing in the scheme of things, and there's different coatings you can put on it to get past that. But yeah, that's why you'll see some of the earlier 416s and whatnot, you'll have issues with the finishes, because aluminum guns are an American thing, not really a German thing. All right, without any further ado, I'm going to set this aside, take a quick break, and grab the HK MR223A3, which is the semi-automatic version of the HK416A5, which is basically an updated version of this gun, and we'll go through the differences between the two. Stay tuned. Hey gang, it's time to do a little comparison here, old versus new. This is first gen 416. This is latest gen 416. Actually, the civilian semi-automatic variant, which is virtually identical. Only real differences are the adjustable gas block, which the civilian semi-automatic version doesn't have. For whatever reason, the Germans get their panties in a bunch over that. So the HK416A5, the latest variants of the 416, the real difference is obviously select fire, but they have the adjustable gas block. This is the MR223A3 semi-auto, no adjustable gas block. All right, so that being the case, let's kind of take you through the whole thing here and just comparing apples to oranges, or apples to apples, if you will. Ditch the stand as per my good buddy Justin's request. Okay. Right off the bat, you can see between the two different selector positions here. Now, I want to say this one has the hammer down, but look, I can put it on safe. Also, Ambi safety. The polymer Ambi safety on both sides, pinned in place. It has a little roll pin that pins it in place on the other side, but this has the ability that you can put it on safe with the hammer down. They're still keeping the pictograms. Also, notice they enlarged the bolt release. This is a standard M16 M4 style. This is one that they enlarged. They also put a ridge on the upper receiver to prevent it from accidentally being depressed when you don't want it to be. They put a Ambi mag release here, and they got a little bridge here, and this is real simple. It has a little lever effect, so you depress it and it pops the mag out. All right, now I was talking to some guys in Germany, some of their SEK guys and whatnot, last time I was over there, and they were using the 416A5 Select Fire version. They liked the gun. One thing they did, though, they would take and put a little piece of flex tie around this to deactivate this. They really were not a fan of this Ambi mag release, and they didn't like the fact as a right-hander they could have it up against their kit or their body armor and accidentally depress the magazine release and pop the mag out. So they were not a big fan of it. I've also seen these break off. So like they get caught on something and snap. The magazine release is still functional as per standard on the other side, but the Ambi side is broke off. So Ambi mag releases on ARs is one of those things that was largely an afterthought, and it just doesn't seem like any of them have really taken off. This is HK's latest and greatest, and I've already seen instances where it just kind of missed the mark. So, but that's what this is. An enlarged bolt release with a fence on the top, and then you see an Ambi mag release with a fence on the bottom. Also notice what they've done here is they've enlarged the trigger guard. Still pivots as normal. You can bring it down, but it's not easily pivoted because this is a roll pin up here and a roll pin here, whereas the standard one you have the ability to spring-loaded punch and bring it down, but it's an enlarged one. They've also done their own series of pistol grips. This is one that I put on the gun. This is kind of a standard one you're seeing on the MR556. They have them with palm swells, they have them without finger grooves, they have different configurations, and they have a little grip, plug on the bottom so you can house batteries or whatnot inside. So they're doing their own version of pistol grips. In the US, probably this closest thing to that available is the one BCM's doing, a little bit more of a straighter design versus the angle. BCM's been very successful with the gunfighter pistol grip, and HK's kind of did their own thing for a while now. You've seen this even on earlier generations of the 416. Now notice here, magazine well angle versus this one. This is the one that's extended, and I was telling you it was extended so it could actuate with the blank fire magazine. This one is as per standard you see with an M16 or an M4. Now unfortunately you can see they went back to the lame ass bevel that Colt does. I don't know why they didn't keep the heavy chamfer that I specified or I asked them to do. They could have just taken this, and you see they have material. They could have really blown this mag well out much better than they did. When I first saw that on these, I was a little bit disappointed. I gotta be honest. Okay, upper receiver largely the same with the exception of this fence right here. This is a set of the HK folding rear and front sight. All right, and like HK has basically developed an entire line of accessories for the 416 that are reverse compatible to a degree to the M16 M4, but they told me that was their plan from the start. They don't like the fact that you go outside and you source all these different components. Remember, if you buy parts and accessories for a G36, or parts and accessories for G3 or whatever or an HK33 or an MP5, you go to HK for that stuff. Obviously they make good money on it, but the real issue is they want to have control on the tech data package. They want to have control on the specs. They want to have control on the tolerances. They want to have control on the quality of the accessories that are going on their gun. They're very cognizant of the fact a part or piece may fail that comes back on them, but that it's something they had no control over. They didn't build a piece. They had no idea the tolerances involved. So they're very cognizant of that, and that's something that they're not real wild about. They had to jump in the deep end of the pool with this weapon system because this gun is the poster child of that stuff. So they're doing the best they can to kind of offer as much of the complete package as possible with accessories and rail systems and flip-up sights and buttstocks and pistol grips and all that kind of stuff they're offering to their end users that buy the 416, so they have one location to go buy the stuff that they know that's been tested and vetted that will interface with the 416 and get the job done. That's where they're coming from on that. All right, now, moving up here, you can see the rail system significantly different. Also notice early on, this was actually a piece that cross bolt threaded into was welded on. The extrusion was separate and this was welded on. HK's changed that, as you would expect, and now this is an enlarged piece of the extrusion, and then they machine it away and they leave this enlarged portion here, this buttress portion here, to thread into. That way they don't have this weld piece here. That was one thing that they got away from. Makes perfect sense. You'll notice this has the HK rail system, very slimline rail system. It's not key mod reverse compatible. It's HK's version more or less of the key mod. To their credit, they saw key mod, liked what they saw, but realized they could do it better. And so they did their own version of it, and from a technical point of view, it is a better version of key mod than the one that's out there. Problem is, only their accessories fit it. I don't know of anybody else of any note that is making accessories that fit the HK rail. Now, I've seen some pictures recently online. It appears that HK may be offering a rail that is true key mod compatible. I'm not sure on that. I'd have to double check on that, but when you see them in this tombstone configuration and the spacing the way it is, that'll tell you right off the bat, this is HK, it's not key mod. All right, Picatinny rail top and bottom, slimline design. Still has access here to the gas block for them to clip on their grenade launcher. That's the theory behind that, is they have the rail mounted grenade launcher that comes back, and then there's a cross bolt that comes through that where the gas block and the barrel trunnion is taking the recoil force of the grenade launcher. Their flash suppressor, I swapped this one out. This was a standard M16 M4 bird cage back in the day. Now they've kind of went down their own path with their G3 style, same one they put on the G3 and HK33 for decades. So kind of a cool little Germanic HK touch right there. Now we flip the gun over. You can see on this side a significant number of changes. One is the buttstock is HK made and designed. This is their slimline. When they have a variety, they have several different ones, and many of them are bigger and bulkier and heavier. This is the slimline design. Also, they've increased the castle nut here on the buttstock. Actually, a pretty good idea. I talked to BCM and said, you know what, you might want to copy this. The great thing about it is, if you collapse the buttstock when it goes all the way down, this increased castle nut dimension helps protect or give the buttstock additional reinforcement for dropping. So if you drop it, now it'll collapse to a certain degree, and the buttstock actually comes up against the castle nut, and you're not putting all your force on your cross bolt down here or your latching mechanism. You're also putting force here on the castle nut to help support the buttstock. It's actually a pretty good idea if you think about it. So that, you got to give HK kudos on that. Now they've got their Ambi sling loop here. I'm not a big fan of these Ambi sling loops in this location. This is a very constricted, confined area back here with the charging handle and the forward assist and your Ambi sling loop. I've never been a big fan of that. I mean, it's cool because it's HK and it came on the gun, but you'll never see me using one of these. I like the fact that BCM now has come out, they're coming out with their Mark II upper, which is redesigned, but one of the things BCM has done, to their credit, is they've made the forward assist more compact and they've moved it forward. So now, instead of this forward assist button being here, it's like in this location, which kind of frees up the rear of the receiver for your sling and your charging handle. Another thing HK's done, they've developed their own charging handles. They're reverse compatible with the ones on the M16 and M4 and whatnot, but you can change the lever to one side or the other. That's why you'll notice the groove that it locks into is on both sides of the receiver. So you can change, if you're a lefty and you want it to go righty or whatever the case may be, you can take this plunger, this paddle, and put it on the other side. HK, that's an effort they've made recently with their guns. Okay. Also, standard brass deflector. You can see the Ambi bolt release right here. Now, it's really meant more to release the bolt when it's locked to the rear. You can lock it to the rear with this, but it has a little fence right here to protect it, so it's a little bit more difficult to dig your finger in to push it up. It can be done, but it really is used more to release the bolt from this side versus locking the bolt to the rear from this side, although it can be done. Okay, so standard magazine release here, even though it's Ambi on the other side and this side it's standard. You can see HK has done a polymer ejection port cover. They've been doing this for quite a while now. It's reverse compatible with the sheet metal steel one. Other than that, big thing over here I want to show you is the difference in the cross bolt. Now this cross bolt here, you can actually put a wrench on and tighten, or you can use a screwdriver. Now this one's a little bit loose, I need to tighten down. Piston inside, pusher rod, everything's essentially the same. The cross bolt is the thing that's really different here. HK went away from this little star design that allowed you to use the bolt head to do it. Now, a lot of stuff is reverse compatible here with a standard M16 M4. You can put on different pistol grips if you want. Obviously, you can do different selectors if you so desire, different magazine releases. Magazines are reverse compatible. To a degree, buttstocks are. So you have a lot of reverse compatibility if you want to use it. HK's kind of intending, hey, this is a plug-and-play system that we've designed that you can use our products on. This is a polymer magazine that HK came up with. This is a Gen 2. All right, kind of almost their version of a PMag, to be quite honest with you. And then this is now the Gen 3 version PMag, which you can see it has the indicator lines here and also in the back. Word is from a buddy of mine in Germany who's various German special operations guy that's got these are very good mags. They've been real happy with them. They hold up real well. They've been a great mag. In the US, these are not super common. They're kind of collector grade mags. But when you see the gun, I don't know if HK is still offering these. I assume they are, but generally when you see the guns out in use now, they're using either a PMag or some other brand of magazine or one of the HK polymer mags, a Gen 2 or a Gen 3. They also have these in a tan version as well. And another thing you're seeing a lot of is HK offering these guns in some kind of a tan format, flat dark earth, or what they call RAL 8000, which is like a NATO stock code for a certain tan color. Overall, great gun. It would be without a doubt my first choice for a piston gun. Where do piston guns come into play? Here's what I tell people. You ask yourself 4 questions. All right, number 1, do I need to use a barrel length shorter than 14.5 inches? Number 2, do I need to do a lot of fully automatic fire? Number 3, do I need to run the gun suppressed? And number 4, do I need to use a wide variety of ammunition? If the answer is no to any of those, or maybe once in a while but not very often, then a direct impingement gun will work just fine for you. Matter of fact, my go-to gun, my bump in the middle of the night gun, the gun I use for training is a BCM direct impingement carbine. Mid-length carbine, runs like a champ. Big fan of it, big fan of BCM, big fan of my good buddy Paul Buffoni, who's the owner. I have no intention of changing. If, however, you're in a situation where you ask yourself those questions and the answer is, yeah, I'm going to be running different types of ammo. I need to have a gun that I can run with a shorter barrel length. I'm going to need a gun that I can run suppressed, whatnot. Then you might want to start looking at a piston gun. A piston gun is something that you need to bring into the equation and take a hard look and see if it's something that you need to use. It's not the gun for everybody. I will tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is the king of all the piston ARs, probably always will be, and it's certainly the most combat proven. So if you're into piston ARs, this is a gun that everything is going to measure against, HK416. Hope you enjoyed it. Probably not the last 416 video or podcast I'll do, but this is the first. Have a good one. I'll leave you out. To get 10% off all plans, use promo code LAV10 at CCW Safe's website and go to CCW Safe's YouTube channel for more great content. Hey, Larry Vickers here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click here to subscribe to the Vickers Tactical channel and take time out to check out some of our other favorite videos.